Hey, everybody. I get a lot of really cool questions asked to me from all sorts of groups that interview me. And recently, I was asked a question in an interview that I want to run by you guys. I want to know what you think. And the question was, do we live in a less violent world? It's a loaded question because as much as we've advanced as a society, there are some parameters in there that lead us to believe that we do live in a less violent world. But I think I bring up some pretty good points in this interview that challenge that. Something for you to think about. I think you'll find it really interesting. I also talk about, things about like when to respond to something. I talk about how people, look at the subject and what the true difference. You hear me talk about the difference between antisocial aggression and asocial violence. I give an actual concrete example of both of them. So it'll really help you clarify. And I also just talk about, the idea of when it would ever be, useful to you and how to think about it. And the idea of just because we live in this technologically, advanced world, we still have to remember we live in a physical world as well. And I think you're going to really enjoy this. These guys, the Business Outlaws, they're really, really good people. They deal with a lot of type A clients, high profile people, and they really, really enjoyed asking this because, again, violence cuts across all demographics, rich, poor, it doesn't care what your gender is, doesn't care what your sexual orientation is. It affects everybody, folks. And therefore, it's a subject we all need to be aware of. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to just go ahead and play the clip, and then I'll have some closing comments for you. The more you study the subject, the more peaceful your life actually is. It's this weird juxtaposition. Of course, people think when they see this book or the title, or they think, I'm out there promoting violence. Everybody should go out there. And if anything, it's not. So we don't understand the subject.
The Business Outlaws. You know that we winning. You know that we're winning. We fight for the cause. We fight for the cause. A circle of winners. A circle of winners. We're Business Outlaws. We're Business Outlaws. You know that we winning. We fight for the cause. A circle of winners. We're Business Outlaws. We're Business Outlaws. We're Business Outlaws.
We have an exciting guest today, Michael.
Yes, we do.
We've been trying to get him for a long time. This has been a long time in the making. I highly suggest that everybody really takes notes. This is as much about business and mindset as anything else, but you're going to learn a lot. We have the famous Tim Larkin, who is the founder and creator of Target Focus Training, self-defense training to quickly and effectively introduce injury in a violent situation. And he wrote the New York Times bestselling book, Survive the Unthinkable, A Total Guide to Women Self-Protecting, and his new book, which we love, When Violence is the Answer. And I want everybody right now to go to Amazon and order this book immediately. But welcome, Mr. Tim Larkin.
That's right. So back to this, when violence is the answer. What I'd like you to speak about is the amount of predators that are out there. People really aren't aware of these folks that are out there, and they're going to come across them in their lives, guaranteed at some point. So, like, what's the different mindset between a victim and a predator, and how do those predators pick out people that are victims?
Well, the way I try to put it in context that people can, everyday context that people can figure out. We drive on the road every day. And if you drive on a 2-lane road, I'm not talking like some of the big freeways that we have out here, but if you just go out one of the side streets out here and you're just driving on a regular 2-lane road, everything works great as long as everybody, stays to their side and agrees to the traffic rules. What happens to people when it comes to violence, when it comes to physical violence, we forget we live in this physical world. We're so caught up in our cell phones and everything that, and the amazing technology that we have, that when violence comes in and we realize, oh shit, I actually live in a physical world, and this person, I have a bigger, faster, stronger individual. They're about to dominate me, and I have nothing in the toolbox to deal with this. That's probably one of the most frightening things for a human being to ever face. So what we have to do though is we have to really be careful about what we hear in society right now. If you've been hearing anything lately, you've probably been hearing we live in one of the most peaceful times ever. The murder rate's down. Murder rate's lower than it's ever been. You hear this one all the time. And you have to ask yourself, okay, is the murder rate down because we're less violent? Or is the murder rate down because we've improved medical technology so much that stuff that literally would have killed you 5 years ago, they're now able to recover and save you. But the act was no less violent. It just didn't result in a murder. So it's a statistical
So you got stabbed 7 times, took you to the hospital.
Exactly.
We saved your life, but 20 years ago you'd been dead.
Exactly. And it gets categorized differently. And so people play games with this. I don't want people to think that we're living in an ultra violent time, but we're definitely living in a much more desperate time. And you really saw it after the crash of 2008. I was living in Las Vegas at that time. In fact, I'm from Vegas. 75% of the properties out there went into foreclosure. 75%.
Wow.
And people forget about that. We had stuff happening in really nice neighborhoods, the equivalent of some of the nicer neighborhoods here in LA. All of a sudden, overnight, they just turned, things were foreclosed and people were getting home invasions.
Thug life took over the neighborhood.
Probably within months. Yeah. It just literally transformed the whole place.
Which is, people really have no concept about how fast things can deteriorate.
Oh yeah. People were living in neighborhoods, and all of a sudden you had gang activity in there. You had illegal grow houses going in there. You had meth houses going, and we're talking really nice neighborhoods.
Oh yeah.
And beautiful houses that were just turned into this kind of stuff. But it was done within months. Yeah. And then people weren't understanding that there are people that have no problem using physical violence against you. And it's such a shocker because we have basically outsourced, our own protection, for quite some time. We haven't, this used to be a life skill that we all had, similar to swimming. Like I tell everybody, if you have kids, I tell parents all the time, how many people have kids? They'll raise their hand. How many are you teaching your kid to swim? And most of them will raise their hand. They'll go, how many are you teaching your kid to swim because you want to be the next Michael Phelps? And then, of course, everybody's hand comes out. No, you're teaching your kid to swim.
To save his life.
To save his life because you don't want them to drown. And therefore, that's a life skill that we all should have. Same thing when it comes to your own self-protection. You need to have some basics in the toolbox because it's a basic life skill. Because unfortunately, if violence comes in the way that we're talking about, if it comes into your life, it's going to be you.
So how do you recognize it? How do you know you're getting into this violent confrontation? How does it all start? How do you know this guy's a predator or this guy's maybe just harmless, just barking? It's
really going through, understanding what we think we need to respond to versus what we really have to respond to. And that's the whole idea. Okay. And I talk about it in the idea, the two contexts that I talk about is antisocial aggression, which for most civilized people, we think we need to respond to that. And I'll give an example of that. Okay. But the real thing we have to worry about is asocial violence. And that's, a whole different world. Antisocial aggression is what the unpleasant situations that happen to us, say at a restaurant or something, somebody knocks into you, they're aggressive, they're loud drunk, anything like that. Anything where you have choice. Like if you choose to take action, you chose to participate in this. If Mike and I walk into a bar and some guy, pours a drink on Mike, annoys him, and he is annoying as hell. And he's probably, everybody in the bar would like to see the guy go. And say Mike says, you know what, I've had it with this guy. He's not listening. I'm going to put him in his place. So he says, okay, what can I do? He goes, I took Tim's class and I learned areas of the human body and go after. Oh, I know. I can hit him in the solar plexus. And you hit the solar plexus like the middle of the torso. It's a group of nerves that'll seize up and it'll be hard for you to breathe. Basically you can breathe out. You can't really breathe in. It's a relatively safe target, all things being equal. But Mike knows nothing about this guy. He just knows he's an annoying asshole. He said something to my girlfriend, poured a drink on me. He's pissing off everybody. So Mike says, screw it. I'm just going to hit him in the solar plexus and get him out of here with security. Mike hits him in the solar plexus. Great. Everybody's happy. All of a sudden, the loudmouths shut up. Everybody's thinking, thank God somebody finally did something. And Mike's feeling pretty good about himself because he's like, oh, God, I got to shut this guy up. And, he's not dead. But all of a sudden, the guy starts turning purple and he's clutching his heart because even though the guy looked like Schwarzenegger in his prime, you had no idea he has a genetically bad heart. And you just triggered an arrhythmia. And now something that was annoying has turned into a situation where we've got probably manslaughter on our hands because this guy's going to drop and die. And now Mike has to deal with that. And over what? And when you look back on this, my thing to everybody is you have to get in your head first and foremost the 3-day rule, meaning whatever event that you're talking about right now, and you have to do this prior to it happening, but you have to ask yourself, 3 days from now, is this going to matter to me? Is it going to matter to me that this guy just cut me off on the road, or that he called me an asshole, or that he, did something, will this matter? And does it matter enough to me that I'm okay 3 days from now, either being 6 feet under or sitting in a jail cell, and very few things meet that threshold, when you're there. So that's the first thing that keeps, when you apply that filter, that keeps us out of most of the avoidable that's out there. And that's my big goal with people is to keep them out of the avoidable. The unavoidable, which is, when violence is the answer, is really the hallmark of it. And I try to keep everything very simple for people to understand. The hallmark of it is you are devoid of choice. There is no choice, meaning no matter what you do, you're about to face imminent grievous bodily harm. And if you don't take action, you're basically participating in your own assault, your own murder at that point. That's that's highlighted by lack of communication. Most of the predators were not communicating with you at that time. I'll give you a quick story example on that. Had a lawyer in London come home about 11:30 at night. It sounds worse than it is because it was actually a nice area of London, a suburb of London. He gets off of the tube and 2 guys follow him into the park. The park's not really a bad park or anything, but he just happens to cut through the park. These guys jack him. They throw him up against the tree. They put knives to his throat. They basically ask him for all his stuff. And he complies. He does everything that the Metropolitan Police over there tell you to do. Don't resist. He gave them jewelry, anything that they wanted, all this stuff. And they left. And everybody loves that part of the story. And this guy kept going to his house. The 2 guys walking away have all the stuff, and then they looked at each other, and literally one guy says to the other, he saw our face. Yeah, it's probably not a good idea. That's literally the only intercourse that they had with each other, about this. They dropped the stuff, turned around, pulled their knives out, and went looking for the guy. They found him. They ran him down. The guy sees them coming. He starts running away. They knock him to the ground. They stab him about 8 times, and they kill him.
Jesus.
Okay. People said they heard the guy yelling, why, I gave you everything. What I try to do with any of my clients is by the end of the training time that I have with them, or by the end of the time that they read the book, that they have the understanding of the difference between those 2 situations. In one situation, it was antisocial. It was antisocial aggression. It was really unpleasant. The guy literally was jacked up against a tree and they held a knife to him, but they were still communicating with him. So you have the option to respond with your social abilities at that point. You can choose to use social at that point. He did, and to good success. What he didn't have in the toolbox was the second time. He didn't recognize the difference between the second time when they came. The second time when they came, their heads were down, the knives were drawn, no communication, and they just ran him down. In a situation like that, all your asocial cues will be going off. And that's when the only thing that's going to work is violence. And you have to be able to use the tool at that point. And so you need to have a system that lets you deal with any human, regardless of size, strength, or any of those other factors, because we can't control that. So there's a lot in that, to unpack, and it was interesting. It was interesting to see people in the questions they're asking, about predators coming and how predators profile you. What I thought was interesting was the way they elaborated on. They wanted to know more about this idea of, how do I respond to what? That's the question most people have. I was trying to it's funny, I started to give an analogy at the beginning of that I didn't get a chance to finish, and I want to finish it for you. If you think about society and how quickly society can deteriorate, and remember, this particular clip was done before COVID. So it's even more relevant right now how quickly society can deteriorate, as we've all seen the last year. Essentially, you're driving down a 2-lane highway, and there's a painted line in the middle. And as long as everybody complies by that, we're fine. Meaning we can drive past each other in opposite directions and everything's great until one person decides to just go on the other side of the road and crash into you. And then at that point, as they're crashing into you, you realize that you depended on basically paint to protect you. That's how thin the veneer of society is. As soon as somebody just doesn't want to play the game, the results can be devastating. So again, it's another reason why you want to study the tool. It's another reason why you want to have this in your quiver, okay? Again, it's not to live a life to be paranoid, but to be very realistic about the tool of violence and how to look at it. Hey, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Again, thank you for subscribing. And I look forward to sharing more information in the very near future.